Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. In 2 Chronicles chapter 6 and 7, we have the dedication of the temple. And something sticks out in our reading of these two chapters, because even though this is a wonderful moment when the temple is completed, when the people could look at the temple and see how glorious and how wonderful and how beautiful it was, that at least a couple times we get a message that even this temple wasn't great enough to really capture the essence of God. Solomon alludes to this and speaks about this in chapter 6 and verse 18, when he says, "But will God indeed dwell with mankind on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain thee. How much less this house I have built?" And then in chapter 7, when the Lord is giving his promise and his warning, he says that he says if they don't obey his commandments, even this wonderful, glorious house will be destroyed. This is found in verse 19. He says, "But if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments, which I have set before you, and shall go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot you from my land which I have given you, and this house which I have consecrated for my name will be cast out of my sight. And I will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. As for this house which was exalted, everyone who passes by it will be astonished and say, Why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house?" And so the Lord says that even this house, even though it is so exalted, I'll destroy it. If you guys don't obey me, I will destroy it. And so we find a God that was so much more glorious, so much more wonderful and powerful than this temple, however wonderful it was. And this is an important message for the exiles as they return back to Judah to consider. That for some 70 years the temple laid in waste, and yet they needed to realize that their God that they served was not connected to nor contained in the temple that once stood there. God was still God whether the temple was there or not. Whether the temple was there in all of its glory, all of its beauty, all of its wonder, or if the temple laid waste in rubble. God is God, and nothing that we can build can contain him. And the exiles needed to remember that. But we need to remember that too. We need to remember that we serve a God that cannot be contained. He cannot be contained by our doctrines, by our creeds. He can't even be contained by the Bible itself. And that may sound shocking, but even the Bible is limited in that it is limited by human language. And there is no human language that can fully contain and reflect God in all of his glory. It cannot describe God in all of his power and all of his attributes. It can speak about them, and it can direct us to the God of the universe, but it cannot adequately describe this God. None of us can adequately describe God. We cannot contain him. We cannot contain him within our own imaginations. No matter how we imagine him, we cannot contain him in our thoughts. We cannot contain him in our church buildings or anywhere else. We cannot put God into a box like we try to do sometimes. God is so much greater than we can even comprehend or even imagine or even explain. And that ought to make us bow down in worship and in awe of this God. And to just recognize the fact that no matter how smart or how much knowledge we might attain, And no matter how vast our imagination is, none of it can capture the Lord our God. Go out on a starry night out in the country and look up at the stars. That, at least for me, always just shows me how incomprehensible and how uncontainable our God actually is. We need to remember this sometimes. We need to remember this whenever we might exalt ourselves too much, whenever we might think too highly of ourselves and the things that maybe we attain to, maybe the degree of righteousness we've attained to in our lives, maybe in our knowledge once again. Before we start thinking too highly of ourselves, we need to put ourselves in the proper place in respect to God. But it also ought to help us in those low times, in those times when we feel downcast, when situations and circumstances become very, very difficult for us, when we become overburdened by the things of this world. We need to remember that there is a God beyond this world, beyond what is seen, that the universe can't even contain, and He is powerful enough and glorious enough and wonderful enough and loving enough to help us in all of life's situations. So let's remember that today. Let's think about this God, this uncontainable, unfathomable, unexplainable God that we serve. What a privilege, what an honor to be able to serve such a God. Well, thank you guys for listening in today. I hope you guys have a great day. I love you guys. God bless.